Michelle Obama, still trying to make her struggling podcast a thing, went on a 4.5-minute tear about herself and how hard it is to be Michelle Obama. We're going to go through quite a bit of it. And who produced it for us again? He came, and it was just the three of us, and he gave us like a couple of lines. In particular, he was giving me things that Michelle Obama has actually said, because I think he had the vision of splicing her in. And you almost couldn't believe them. It was like, I think you might need to go back and check that. There's no way that must have come from some other parody. But no, time and time again, it was her exact words. She's even more miserable than we portrayed her.
Even more. And since then, I can't wait to see how this is received, because I think it's another banger.
Megyn Kelly and Patrick Bet-David just tore straight through Michelle Obama's carefully polished image like a political storm with no warning. Forget the polished speeches, emotional interviews, and perfectly crafted public image. This was a direct hit on the hypocrisy the media keeps defending and the non-stop victim narrative pushed for years. With sharp commentary and zero hesitation, they cut through the PR spin and exposed what they see as a massive web of contradictions. If you thought Michelle Obama was untouchable, think again. This wasn't just a roast. It was a full-blown demolition of the image built around her for decades.
How difficult it is for Black women like Michelle to articulate their pain.
We grew up with women who weren't voicing the pain and the burden. They made it look easy. And when you make stuff look easy, people assume that you must like this.
Yeah.
It's okay with you, right?
Right.
You know, we don't articulate as Black women.
And the part that makes me a little bit, speculative here, skeptical here, is which of the two ceremonies to not show up to do you think gave me more concern? Carter or not showing up to Trump's inauguration?
Carter,
Yeah.
100%. It's a national thing, and he was a decent
president
guy.
has nothing to do with Trump. Died.
Yeah. Exactly.
There's some funerals you have to go to.
Megyn Kelly didn't step onto that stage to play nice. From the very beginning, she looked completely in control and already several moves ahead. She came armed with sharp jokes, tough facts, and the kind of energy that made it clear this showdown had been building for years. And Michelle Obama? She suddenly found herself in the middle of a brutal public takedown, in front of an audience that had been waiting for someone to finally say what so many others were too nervous to say out loud.
Michelle, she should change her name to Misery Obama. That's really what I think of when Misery Obama never has a positive word to say. Never. Not about children, not about family, certainly not about her husband. By the way, before we leave this topic, here's her latest soundbite that made the rounds. This happened on June 18th, but I was off.
Megyn started off calm and calculated, with a smirk on her face as she slowly picked apart the larger-than-life image built around Michelle Obama. Like a skilled professor exposing flaws in a weak argument, she mocked the idea that the former First Lady was still treated like untouchable American royalty. According to Megyn, the spotlight around Michelle wasn't created by extraordinary accomplishments, but by a media machine obsessed with turning every glance, comment, and outfit into front-page news.
Right. So you don't go to that and you don't even comment. First of all, if I'm the Carter family, I feel disrespected. Now, maybe she would have called them and said, look, I don't want to comment on this, but I'm calling you out of respect just to tell you I'm not going to be there for my own reasons. Please understand I can't. I'm so sorry. Da-da-da-da-da. Great. Maybe she made that phone call to the Carter family. Great. Good for you.
She also mocked what she saw as intense media attention on Michelle Obama's everyday activities, from fashion choices to gardening and fitness routines. In her view, even simple actions were often elevated and heavily praised in public coverage. She questioned how much of that public image was shaped by media framing, suggesting that routine initiatives and lifestyle messaging were sometimes portrayed in an overly symbolic or exaggerated way. Raising an eyebrow, Megyn asked how someone whose public work included widely discussed initiatives like school nutrition advocacy and wellness campaigns had come to be viewed by some as occupying a near untouchable moral position in public discourse.
I'm so glad I didn't have a boy. Because he would have been a Barack Obama.
Baby Barack, it would have been amazing.
No, I would have felt for him.
She just borrowed our boys.
Yes, I got plenty.
Wow.
You catch that? She She's glad she didn't have a boy because he would have been a Barack Obama. And that's a hard pass for her. This woman can't stand him. She can't.
Wait a minute. Now I like her.
She joked that if you believed all the hype, you'd think Michelle Obama walked into every room surrounded by wisdom and perfection, handing out kale chips and life advice like some kind of untouchable icon. But then Megyn took things even further. She questioned the idea that Michelle was supposedly above politics while constantly stepping into political battles, with carefully scripted outrage and a massive PR machine backing every move. Megyn argued that Michelle always knew how to play the political game, even while acting like she was somehow removed from it.
Michelle Obama is slammed for whining about costs in the White House. Okay. I don't know if you guys have seen this or not. This is her speaking with, is this the diaries of a CEO, right? So, Rob, if you can play this clip, this is her talking about how expensive it was to live in the White House. Go for it.
It's expensive to live in the White House.
Yeah.
As many people don't know. I mean, much is not covered. You're paying for every bit of food that you eat. You're not paying for housing and the staff in it, but everything, even travel. If you're not traveling with the president, if your kids are coming on a Bright Star, which is the First Lady's plane, we had to pay for their travel to be on the plane.
Megyn admitted it worked brilliantly, because nothing is more effective than claiming you dislike politics while still running a highly visible national book tour that feels like a soft power campaign. As for the book itself, Megyn had strong opinions. She described it as the literary version of a Hallmark card, dressed up with self-importance and expensive design choices. She pointed out how Michelle managed to say a lot on the surface while revealing very little underneath, like a magician keeping the audience focused on her hands while the real trick stays hidden backstage. In her view, each chapter leaned on vague reflections and familiar empowerment slogans, the kind you might see printed on luxury throw pillows in an upscale boutique. And yet, she noted, people still embraced it because the branding was flawless and the name carried enormous weight. The podcast, too, drew her attention. Megyn described it almost humorously, imagining it recorded in a carefully curated setting where everything felt overly polished and intentionally soothing, more like a lifestyle experience than a hard-edged conversation. On media bias, she argued that every episode seemed shaped by a layer of production designed to sound meaningful without ever committing to a firm stance on anything controversial or concrete.
If we knew. If we knew.
Or, and we have to ask ourselves, the men in our lives is, why wait to be asked?
What do you mean?
It seems like what we go through is pretty obvious. I mean, maybe we're not complaining, but we're actually living life out loud.
This is the perfect soundbite after the discussion we just had about how the left looks at everything through this identity. You could say prism. You could also say prison, where she's talking about how women aren't allowed to articulate their pain, about how they just suck it up. They don't show that, as if men never do that, Glenn.
Megyn then shifted her focus to what she called Michelle's recurring narrative about how difficult life at the top could be. She remarked that if victimhood were treated like an asset, Michelle would rank among its most successful investors, always pointing to some obstacle, some unseen force making things harder along the way. And yet, Megyn noted, those struggles were often told alongside a life of private travel, luxury experiences, and book deals large enough to rival entire industries. She then highlighted what she saw as contradictions in the messaging. In her view, Michelle often spoke about unity while delivering remarks that could be interpreted as sharply dividing. She talked about privilege while living a lifestyle far removed from the everyday experience of most Americans, and criticized political aggression while operating within highly strategic media and public appearances. By the time Megyn finished her critique, the atmosphere shifted, not necessarily from shock, but from a sense that a different interpretation had been laid out in full. She framed Michelle less as an untouchable figure and more as a product of modern political celebrity, polished, influential, but also heavily managed and widely protected from scrutiny. Then, as the conversation transitioned, Patrick Bet-David stepped in. Where Megyn's approach was sharp and analytical, Patrick's presence brought a more direct, business-minded energy, focused, structured, and ready to break the discussion down from a strategic angle.
Proposition, and you're running for 2 years and not earning an income. So all of that was in my mind. How would we manage this? So my fears came from the fact that I thought he could win. Because maybe way in the back of my mind, I was hoping that maybe he wouldn't, that this would be the last thing he would do.
He started with the numbers. Patrick doesn't warm up for long. He went straight into his breakdown, using figures and comparisons to map out what he described as a carefully built personal brand around empowerment and influence. He pointed to how Michelle Obama's public image evolved over time, from promoting simple lifestyle messaging to becoming a major figure in media deals, speaking engagements, and corporate partnerships tied to inspirational branding. In his view, the messaging often stayed consistent, but the scale and business side behind it grew significantly. Patrick argued that her strength was in combining motivational storytelling with highly marketable positioning, where even lifestyle themes were packaged into broader media and commercial opportunities. He summed it up by saying that modern influence often blends inspiration with business strategy, and she understood that better than most. He also questioned the idea of relatability, suggesting that public figures at that level naturally operate in a different world from everyday audiences, no matter how simple messaging appears on the surface. To him, comparing that lifestyle to the average person misses the structural gap between public image and reality. Finally, Patrick turned to media dynamics, describing how certain public figures benefit from strong institutional support that shapes how criticism is received. In his view, media ecosystems can sometimes amplify praise while making open criticism more socially costly, creating a protective layer around high-profile personalities.
Here is Michelle Obama, within the past week or so, I've been trying to get to this soundbite for a couple of days now, on Trump voters, female voters in particular. This is a woman who's supposed to understand America and the women of America, and she supports other women. She's a feminist hero. Here she is.
Can't wait to hear this.
This is why I implore the men in the world who have women that they say they care about, daughters that they are raising, that this is their issue too. I mean, for men to sit on their hands over this issue and trade out women's health for a tax break or whatever it is.
He laughed at the media's fixation on Michelle Obama's fashion choices, as if a dress color or public appearance somehow carried deeper political meaning or moral authority. In Patrick's view, that kind of focus often distracted from more serious conversations about influence, messaging, and public perception. He then made a broader point about modern celebrity culture, arguing that highly polished storytelling can sometimes feel larger than life, especially when paired with themes of hope and inspiration. To him, the contrast between uplifting messaging and the intensity of public commentary is what makes figures like Michelle stand out in the media landscape. Patrick then shifted into a more serious tone, saying the real issue he saw wasn't just influence itself, but how narratives can be framed in different ways depending on perspective. He suggested that public storytelling often blends personal experience with broader themes, and once it reaches a national stage, it can be interpreted in many different ways by different audiences. He added that charisma plays a major role in public life, especially when communication style, tone, pauses, and delivery shapes how messages are received. In his analysis, strong communicators often know how to control pacing and emotion to keep audiences engaged and focused on the intended message. Finally, he pointed out that modern public figures often build entire media ecosystems around their brand, including books, podcasts, interviews, and documentaries. In his view, this is part of how influence is maintained today, through consistent storytelling across multiple platforms, each reinforcing the same overall image and message.
Can you type in Obama's net worth in 2007? What was Obama in 2007? 1.2 million, 1.3 million. Okay, so their net worth is, let's write this down. This is pre-White House. Their collective net worth was 1.3 million. Can you go to where their net worth was in 2016 when they're done being presidents? Okay, 2016. So their net worth, as expensive as it was, they went from being 1.3 million to 12.2 million.
He joked that if she sneezed, someone would probably turn it into a slogan and print it on a coffee mug as inspiration. In Patrick's view, Michelle Obama wasn't just a public figure. She was a fully built brand, supported by PR teams, boosted by algorithms, and surrounded by a network of supporters whose careers often benefited from staying aligned with her image. He pointed out what he saw as a contradiction between messages of public service and a lifestyle that exists far removed from everyday experiences. To him, that gap is what fuels ongoing debate about modern celebrity influence in politics and culture. Patrick also criticized the contrast between messaging about sacrifice and the realities of high-end speaking events and media deals, arguing that these moments often highlight how different elite spaces are from ordinary life. He then turned to how personal narratives are shaped in the public eye. In his view, storytelling in modern media often blends personal reflection with broader emotional appeal, which can make messages feel universal even when they come from highly specific experiences. Finally, Patrick argued that influence today is maintained through a combination of branding, media platforms, and consistent public messaging. In his interpretation, this creates a system where certain voices remain highly elevated, shaping conversations while also drawing ongoing debate about distance, privilege, and perception.
I'll let you pick up your point in the back end of this, but listen to her talking about her 8 years in the White House. SOT 27.
So I'm at this stage in life where I have to define my life on my terms for the first time. So what are those terms? And going to therapy just to work all that out. Like, what happened that 8 years that we were in the White House? What did that do to me?
Yes.
Internally, my soul, we made it through. We got out alive. I hope we made the country proud. My girls, thank God, are whole. But what happened to me?
He described what he saw as a broader issue with modern political culture, arguing that public narratives can sometimes feel disconnected from the lived reality of ordinary people. In his view, leadership should be grounded in direct understanding of everyday struggle, not only in polished storytelling or media-friendly messaging. He suggested that the country benefits more from practical solutions and grounded perspectives than from repeated motivational speeches, especially when those messages are heavily curated for public consumption. As the discussion continued, the tone in the room shifted into something more intense and reflective. The conversation had moved beyond personality and image, focusing instead on how public figures are perceived, debated, and interpreted in the wider media landscape. There was a sense that deeper questions were being raised, not just about individuals, but about how narratives are built, challenged, and sustained in modern culture. The atmosphere carried weight, as if the audience were reacting to a perspective that challenged familiar assumptions. And as the moment settled, it became clear the discussion wasn't over. Megyn wasn't finished yet.
Pre-presidency, 1.7. So expensive being at the White House. It was so expensive that our net worth went from 1.3 million to 12.2 million 8 years later. What an expensive lifestyle. And then you go from 12.2 million to $70 million. What do you think the average person that listens to this, do you think they connect to that, Michelle? I'm just curious. You're a very good communicator.
She circled back with a sharper edge, using the moment to revisit what she saw as a recurring theme in Michelle Obama's public storytelling around life in the White House. In Megyn's framing, there was a contrast between the comforts of high office, security, staff, and access, and the way certain experiences were later described as deeply burdensome. She questioned the tone often used in those reflections, suggesting that public criticism and pressure come with any position of visibility and influence, especially at the highest levels of government. In her view, the line between discomfort and real hardship is often blurred in media narratives. Megyn also criticized what she described as a broader tendency in modern public branding, where personal anecdotes are elevated into larger symbolic narratives that resonate emotionally with audiences, even when the underlying experiences vary widely from those of everyday life. Then Patrick stepped back in, shifting the focus toward the idea of legacy itself. He argued that public legacies are ultimately measured through tangible outcomes, policy impact, leadership decisions, and long-term results, rather than media visibility or cultural presence. He questioned how influence is defined in modern politics and public life, suggesting that prominence and documentation do not always equate to measurable change. In his view, the real question is what concrete differences were made and what personal or political risks were actually taken in the process.